with Chicago. There was a time I went to a hockey game with a white guy and a Mexican guy, and we went to go see the Blackhawks play. And I got pulled aside out of line and patted down because my coat was puffy. The white guy and the Mexican guy turned around and said, "Did you just pat him down at a hockey game?" Like, first of all, he's the only black guy here. Why would he bring a what? Like, what's wrong with you?
I distinctly remember this on my football team junior year. I did only play 1 year of football in high school, and it was my junior year. We had an entirely white team. And this, there were actually two in my class. There were 3 black kids in my school. One of them came out and played football. And I distinctly have this memory of everybody going, "We finally have a running back." That was the thought before he tried out. And then, of course, he tried out. He had some moves, and it was like, of course he does. He's the black guy. Good morning, Rodney. How you doing today?
Morning, Keith. Doing really well. How are you?
I'm great, man. Today's a great day for a great day. What's on your mind?
Great day for a great day. And also some bone broth. I've been making my own bone broth recently.
Bone broth? Where do you come up with these things? What is bone broth?
I'm out here just trying to improve a little bit every day. Bone broth is basically like slow cooking beef neck bones, chicken carcasses, like just bones from animals that you eat to get the marrow and cartilage out. It's got a lot of benefits, collagen, blood builder. It's good stuff, man.
Sometimes
it tastes good.
Sometimes when you have these things, I think that's a good idea. The rest of the time, I think, why don't you let me know how that goes next week?
Roger.
Hi, I'm Keith.
And I'm Rodney.
And welcome to Under the Skin. This is a podcast where we explore conversations that are difficult to have around the dinner table, like race, politics, sexism.
And we're going to expose, evaluate, and evolve our mindsets and our thinking around all of these topics. And we're going to invite guests in and understand their stories and why they have the perspectives that they do. And we're going to learn a lot.
And so this is our little experiment, and we look forward to you guys coming along on this journey with us.
And today we're going to take a look at our racial experience and how we got to where we are right now.
So Rodney, why don't you walk us through your background a little bit? Just kind of frame up where you come from.
Yeah. So look, I grew up in Indiana. I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I was there for most of my adolescent life. What about you, Keith? Where are you coming from? Where'd you grow up?
I actually grew up in New Hampshire, where I spent all of my adolescent life. And that actually took me out to Indiana from there, where I went to Purdue for school and where I actually met you.
That's where we met, exactly. Wait, so hold on. This is like radio basically, so nobody can see us. So maybe we should tell them.
So you want me to admit that I'm the white guy and
right, and I'm the black guy. Yeah, we should probably tell them.
Okay. I think we just told them. So Indiana. So we met in Indiana. I diverted and went off to Rochester, New York to get some city experience because obviously New Hampshire and Indiana aren't exactly big city living. And from there, I wanted to get bigger city living after a year in a rough economy to find a job after college and moved out to Chicago, where I spent about 10 and a half years to where I am now in Cleveland, where I got an opportunity to start a family and have only been here for about 7 months.
So wait, let's go.
How about you after Indiana? After Indiana, real quick.
After Indiana, I also Purdue, obviously, because it's where we met, but then Chicago. Was fortunate enough to move to the big old windy city and was there for 3.5 years or so before moving out to LA, where I've been for almost 9 years now. So you've lived in 3 places, but you also grew up
you were born in Ohio.
I was born in Ohio, but it was less than a year, so I can't really count it as influencing my background that much.
So growing up in Indianapolis, right? You grew up in Indiana, so you did grow up in a city.
Some would call it that, yeah. No, it's a city. Yeah, absolutely.
I like Indianapolis. Yeah. So, and as a black man in Indianapolis, what was your racial experience growing up? We'll focus not just your experience growing up, because that could be a much longer conversation. What was your racial experience growing up in Indiana?
I think I was really oblivious to it. And it probably has a lot to do with my parents and just the way I was brought up. But when I think back, there are certain moments that stand out. And one thing that actually did bother me growing up, and it probably bother anybody, but I was a Oreo. I mean, before we mentioned who was white and black, you may not have guessed that either one of us was black. I've been told my whole life, like, I don't sound like a black guy, which even as a young kid, my big question back to that was, what does that mean? Like, to sound black. And I knew what they meant. Like, they wanted me to sound like what they thought black people sound like. But even as a child, like, that was just like, man, that's so messed up. Like, how are you going to tell me, like, well, I'm the black guy and I'm talking, so that's what a black guy sounds like. And it can also sound like insert 45 dialects. I mean, it could even sound like an English guy talking, because there are English black guys, right?
Alternative fact.
That's a fair. There was a point I remember having a conversation with my mom about my white voice, like using my white voice strategically.
What does that mean?
Whether it was
what is that?
Yeah, like my white voice, like sounding prim and proper and enunciating every syllable and just recognizing who my audience was and when it might be beneficial, like when I'm in school or talking to an authority figure like a police officer or in a job interview, to not sound uneducated, or to take it another step, to sound white on purpose, to sound more. And she didn't take it this far. She just threw it out there, and it really confused me at the time. Like, I really didn't understand it. But now looking back, I get it, because it's the idea, I think, and you know what? I have to ask her. Maybe we bring her on. Ask her. But I think it had a lot to do with just sounding disarming and just being like, oh, well, you sound just like me. You don't look like me, but you sound like me. So we are friend. We are friend.
When I met you, you were often referred to as we'll say, Uncle Tom, which is a derogatory term for a black man who tries to be too white, right? Now, you weren't necessarily trying to be too white, but growing up with that framework, how did that affect you and mold your experience? Like, that's kind of a big thing, right?
Well, there's another piece of it too. Like, I was generally one of, right? Like, so I was one of 2 or 3, if I was lucky, 4 other black kids at any given time. Like, there was never, generally I was token. Like, I was the one black guy or one black kid, period, in my class, if not in, several classes. And then there were some times where, like in high school, that ratio was a little bit better. Like one of, I don't know, 15, like, lots of us. But, yeah, I think that colored it a lot, right? Cause I was just around white people all the time. Wait. And so I do want to go deeper into it, but before we go too far, let's talk about New Hampshire. Cause like, it's interesting because I grew up around pretty much all white people. And Indy is pretty much, at least when I grew up, a white and black town. And I would say maybe 20% black at the time.
It's fairly diverse, right? I mean, our national population is what? 12?
Yeah.
Right?
So it's a little above that.
Compared to where I grew up. I think growing up, when I was in New Hampshire, it was about 90, I think it still is about 96.5% white. The entire state. Million person population. What's interesting though, talking about this after you just shared that story, I come from the other side of that story. I graduated high school. I actually was just looking through my yearbook the other day because, we found it after doing some cleaning. And I went through, and I think there was one Filipino that I graduated with. There were two black students. They were brother and sister, twins. And that was about it from a diversity standpoint. I graduated with 325-ish students. So you're talking about less than 1%, just under 1% of that diversity. And I might be missing a few other races in there, but from an African American standpoint, there were only 2. Less than 1%.
Well, and that's, so that's an interesting thing too. Like generally all right, so if I say, let's talk about race, like what is the first thing that pops in your head?
Black and white. Like,
let's talk about race and, yeah. We typically leave out all the others.
Definitely something to bookmark, right? And talk about, cause it is one of those things.
Well, you asked about diversity in Indianapolis, and white and black, like the black population is higher than I think probably most states in the union. That said, it wasn't super diverse. That's the first thing that struck me about being in LA. When I got here, I think I went to a Costco and I was looking around in the parking lot. I was like, wow, I'm a minority. Like, cause like I didn't even see, like I saw Asian and Latino, no black, no white. Like when I was walking, my first, I was like, wow, that's diversity. Cool.
Yeah. Let's bookmark LA because we definitely want to get into that. Kind of going back to New Hampshire, right? Having such a high white percentage. I didn't really.
So you didn't have many black kids in any class.
Any class growing up. What was funny is growing up, I distinctly remember this on my football team junior year. I did only play 1 year of football in high school, and it was my junior year. We had an entirely white team, and this, there were actually 2 in my class. There were 3 black kids in my school. One of them came out and played football. And I distinctly have this memory of everybody going, we finally have a running back.
Like that was the first.
That was the thought.
Like before he even tried out or anything?
Tried out, and then of course he tried out. He had some moves, and it was like, of course he does. He's the black guy.
So it
right?
Like self-fulfilling. Like it turned into
and it's one of those things. So growing up in that type of ecosystem, I've always had this inclusive frame of mind, right? This idea that, hey, no one's.
Well, New Hampshire is a fairly liberally minded state.
Depends on who you're talking.
It's interesting because it's like, it's the don't tread on me.
Live free or die mentality. And that is
live free or die,
how the culture is. So it isn't an exclude anybody. It just happens to be very white. It's not very white because everybody wants black people out of the state. It just happens to be very white. I've never dug into why that is, but at the same time, having that perspective even though it was very white, I didn't ever have the perspective of shunning a minority, right? Like it was, here you are. But the thing about it is your stereotypes were exacerbated because you weren't around, okay, black people are more athletic. They're faster. They're quicker. He's going to be a running back, right? So it was interesting and I think about the evolution of me leaving New Hampshire, having that. One of the things that ties into that stereotype point, and I'll share a story as I transitioned out, was the hip hop culture, right? Just like any other state, the hip hop culture, it was the 90s, right? I wore my pants below my butt. Like my mom hated it.
Which is funny because that's attributed to hip hop, but that's actually like prison culture going into hip hop. But
that's
anyway.
Fair, right? But from our perspective as a hip hop culture, and at that time, the N-word with the A at the end was often used and discussed in culture about who can use it, and it's black people
it's still a conversation,
right? It is still a conversation. But I remember we used to say it all the time. I actually had one of my close friends at the time. He went to DC for college, and he started saying it after he went to DC, and he'd say it to me, and I'd hear people say it in college because I was still in New Hampshire at the time because I transferred to Purdue. And I would start saying it, and then people were just saying it. Just, hey, what up? You know, like it were no big deal.
What up, man?
Yeah. No accountability to it, right? No accountability. And I left New Hampshire with this mindset of race that it really wasn't a thing. Not that we didn't have differences and there weren't white people and black people, and not that racism didn't exist. But I didn't really know it existed, right? I didn't really see it. I didn't think about it.
Wait. So before you go too deep into that, I question.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had that culture, and you and your friends were, what up, my ninja? We'll just radio edit.
Ninja is a good
and when we met at Purdue, you pretty much hung out with an all black crew. So I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
And then also, like, we used to use the N-word all the time. Like, what up, my ninja? So those two things, like.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good point of the evolution of my racial perspective, right? So, and since we're going to Indiana where we join, I'll keep on my story here because I, definitely want to hear how yours evolved into college, but into Chicago in particular.
Right.
But let's join the two. So I left New Hampshire with this mindset of racism wasn't really a big deal, right? Like it existed.
As in it didn't, it exists.
It existed, but it was far more subtle. It was, I knew it intellectually because we talked about it in school and the difference between overt racism and subtle racism and how it changed from Jim Crow to you're like, so you're at that point, you're basically like, yeah, it exists in Mississippi, maybe. Right.
Like,
it exists away from me. And then I moved to Indiana. So 20 years in New Hampshire, what up, my ninja? Hey, ninja, all of that, all the time. And maybe let's not exaggerate what all the time is, but,
sure.
Certainly that. And
you weren't coming home calling your mom.
Then I go to New Hampshire. No, I was not. And then I go to Purdue, and I met you day one, and it was instant friendship, right? Because I think that framework of New Hampshire is an inclusive state. It just doesn't have a lot of people, a diverse population. It doesn't mean it's an exclusive state, right? So having that mentality, it wasn't like I met you and was like, oh, who's this black guy? It was just like, oh, this is a cool dude across the hall and all is good. And didn't really have a framework of racism. I didn't have any experiences with it. I didn't think about it. And then I'll never forget the moment I had my first level of accountability in all of this. And we like to share this story, and I'm going to tell this story. Rodney and I'll tell it to the audience, and another friend of ours, Jarvis, we were sitting around playing Madden. I had been there for like...
You two were playing, I'm watching.
He's the Steelers.
I'm sitting behind you.
He's the Steelers. Watching. I'm the Patriots.
Cause he always picks the best team that year in Madden. It's not about his team.
And he beat people, and it was just always a pleasure when you had an opportunity to beat him. And I was sitting on the coffee table, or the chest that you used as a coffee table, and you two were sitting on the couch. And I throw a pass down the sideline, right? To my receiver, and he dropped it. Mm-hmm. And I go, shoot, ninja, catch the ball, and froze. It's my first moment of accountability in all of this thing, because it was the first time I'd ever used that word, and actually the last time I've ever used that word, in the presence of a black person. I count
two. And so you, and at that point, we'd known each other probably
like 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe a little longer. I was going to say 6 months.
Okay. We'll say 6 months.
Jarvis and I look at each other. Because it's not like we'd known each other since high school, and we had never had this conversation. I don't even think this happened in our football locker room. But did it? I gotta explore that thought. But we look at each other, and we just busted out loud. Because you were the last person in the world we expected to ever say that. I slow
turned and looked at them, and then they started laughing. And two things happened in that moment. One, accountability, don't ever say the word again. And two, I realized I had friends for life. But the second point is less relevant to the conversation. But it was that moment that helped me realize the depths of the words that we use, regardless of who we're around, right? There's potential consequence. The reality of me saying that is you guys could have said, get the hell out of my house, because I was in your apartment at the time. It could have been awful, right?
Right. It could have been a fight. It could have been get out. And look, and our response is probably not a typical response. This is us in no way recommending that you try this around some black people, because they may not be as tolerant as we would.
But I think the reality it's so true. And the reality for me was, it's like all this time prior, I've been saying this, and now all of a sudden I say it, and there's a different sentiment behind it in the words that are coming out just based on the audience. That was a reality check for me that I shouldn't have been saying it up to that point. And we're not gonna keep going with the use of this word. So that was an evolution.
Which is a conversation, totally, because it's such a big conversation, and we're not condoning it. Yeah. It's just part of our experience, right? And it's interesting because going back to my Indiana a little bit, like my parents did not, they never used it. And they were like, you should never say the N-word. Just don't. It's bad word. It's like saying the F word. And that was kind of that was the upbringing. Knowing now, didn't know then, but like my dad grew up saying it all the time. Like that was just part of his upbringing. And so there's kind of a, hey, like we want to raise you differently. But then but see, okay, also I'm growing up in Indiana. I'm the minority. I'm the one black dude, right? So who am I going to say it to? So there's really I didn't have a black group of friends.
So that's until college. So how did Purdue,
right?
This for me was a giant moment for my racial perspective going forward as far as college goes. For you, all of a sudden now you have a crew of black friends that you didn't have before.
I mean, I did in high school.
Sorta.
But, it was just a lot smaller. Right. It was a lot smaller.
So how did that change your racial perspective?
I actually wrestled with it because there were moments where I'm just like, yeah, N-word's cool. Like we say it. And then other days like, nah, man, I can't say it. I was wrestling with myself.
Because then you have the Uncle Tom piece of it too, right? How did that...
Well, from what perspective? Like people thinking that?
And now you're going into a larger black community.
Well, it's like...
And that brand didn't necessarily go away because some of those people in that community you knew in high school.
It wasn't more of a trying to act white. It's more like, oh, well, Rodney sounds white.
But that was the brand, right? Like that's what...
That's Right. But I think it was, I guess I haven't really explored like how that affected me in college. At that point, I think this is how it affected my experience. At that point, like, I was comfortable with me, so I was just like, all right, well, either you have a problem with it or you don't. But it didn't affect my ability to make black friends.
No, it did not. That is very true. In fact, it didn't affect your ability to make a lot of friends since you knew just about everybody.
Right. Or friends in any group. I actually was probably Van Wilder dark version at Purdue, yeah. Further.
I think this is a fascinating evolution of your experience as especially as a black man in America, is that you haven't, it's not necessarily that you haven't been exposed, but you haven't experienced it, right? You have not experienced what you may have been followed in a store, but you haven't experienced what that's like because you don't pay attention to that.
Which, right.
Or it just hasn't been so
I don't
hindering,
know
right?
why I didn't notice. I mean, I had a cross country coach tell me we were stretching in high school, and he told us that when he was running cross country, they went out to the barn of one of his coaches in Martinsville, Indiana, which is one of the homes of the KKK. And they went out to the barn and they were playing around. They shouldn't have been. And they opened a chest and they found a red cloak, which he wasn't sure. He was young at the time, or he was in he was in high school, but the red cloak is usually the Grand Dragon of the KKK. And so he thinks that the grandfather of the coach that he had was the Grand Dragon. So, like, I'm hearing these stories. Like, I know my parents wouldn't even let me drive from Indianapolis to IU because you had to cross through Martinsville, just because that area is just so known to be. And I think that's why I say sheltered, right? They're like, all right, you're just not going to be put in a situation where you're going to get pulled over there or run or have a flat tire or stop and get gas in Martinsville, because who knows? Wait, can I ask you a question before we go to your perspective? Like, in your time in New Hampshire and whatnot, like, had you ever experienced anything racist? Like, any black dudes be like, hey, honky, like, blah, blah, blah. Like, does that ever happen to you?
No, I mean, there was a black family that lived down the street, and I think the most racial exposure to that was, hey, we have a black family down the street. Like, it was obvious. It existed, but it wasn't. I look back on it wondering how that had to have been hard for them. But for us, it was just, oh, hey, there's a black family that lives down the street. And that was the extent of the conversation. Never anything racially profiling. I never saw anything other than the football player, right? And what's interesting on that note, kind of going back to what you were talking about as far as experience being sheltered and not having seen it, I still, even after Purdue, despite knowing, hey, these things happen, we had some minor things that may have exposed it, is still this idea of subtle versus overt racism. And I've heard a lot of stories, and we all have, about feeling followed, and this mindset is, well, how do you really know that person was following you? Or how do you really extrapolate racism from that comment versus it actually being racist, right? And that had always been something that was in the back of my mind, and I know it's in the back of a lot of people's mind a lot of times, until we were in Chicago together. And I'll never forget that time we went to the club. And it was you, me, your current wife, girlfriend at the time, and another friend of ours. Yes. Fairly certain she was there. Maybe I'm not remembering it correctly. Maybe I thought it was just like me, roommate.
I thought it was me, you, roommate, and
it was our roommate at the time. Friend. That's right, because we were, and another friend. So we walk up to this club, and Rodney's wearing Timberlands.
For those who don't know, those are boots.
and our friend is wearing black shoes. And this is a non-posh, wannabe posh club that was just fun to go and dance at.
In Lincoln Park, Chicago.
And so we go up to the door, and they look at us and say, we can't let you in with those shoes on.
I thought you were already in.
Through,
like they let,
and then found out that you couldn't get in because you were wearing Timberlands. So it was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. So we were all a little bit frustrated.
Which is funny, because my response was, that's BS,
right,
but alright, I'll go home and change, like, I'll just change my shoes. Like, I didn't even,
you just kind of accepted it, even though you hadn't really been exposed to it, or at least exposed yourself to these types of experiences over time. And I had never witnessed anything like this. Because what happened next was we walked down the street, Rodney and our friend just changed shoes, and we all got in the club 5 minutes later.
We were like, let's try this out.
Later,
yeah.
And not even a question. Right in. Didn't even look at our friend.
And then after a drink or two, I was just sitting there like, this is some bull. Like,
and then he got really mad.
I got mad.
And that was one of those things that truly, for me, opened my eyes to this type of reality, right? The reality that exists with a lot of people and the experiences a lot of black people have, and how crazy that is and how it needs to stop, right? Like, that type of stuff is just outrageous, right?
Like, it was like, he just looked at me and went straight to, like, okay, how can I exclude you from said establishment? And like, oh, it's your shoes.
And we went back, changed his shoes, and he didn't even look at him.
Along with Chicago, there was a time I went to a hockey game with a white guy and a Mexican guy, and we went to go see the Blackhawks play whomever at the United Center, and I was the third of the three of us, and I got pulled aside out of line and patted down because my coat was puffy. Well, it was Chicago in winter, so it was like,
it was cold.
I don't know,
worthy of a
-2.
puffy
Like,
coat.
it was ridiculously cold, and the white guy and the Mexican guy turned around and said, "Did you just pat him down at a hockey game? Like, first of all, he's the only black guy here. Why would he bring like, what's wrong with you?" And I was like, really? Like, I'm getting pat down at a hockey game? Come on. Like, what? That frustrated me. They bought me dinner, so I calmed down.
That was nice.
They as in my friends, not the United States.
Yeah. Did that at all change? Because it doesn't seem to me in just having this conversation that you really see. For me, I look at all of these things and it's like, man, I need to be better. I need to be more inclusive. I need to have more accountability. And you kind of have this perspective. It seems like this is just the way it is. I'm going to try to make it better as best I can. But, you know, when this stuff it happens, right? Am I missing the boat? Like, kind of
No, I mean, I didn't have any grand epiphany. Like, I need to make the world better and rid the world of racism or this, that, either. I was just like, Like,
and so now I'm curious how all of what we just talked about, what you shared, has kind of molded to you today, because you have had a fairly unique experience of race, using air quotes, because you haven't necessarily allowed yourself to experience that subtle racism. So now you're here on a podcast talking about race. Why, and how does that frame it up for you?
So my mindset today is, I spend a lot of time with the Boys and Girls Club in Venice. Want to show them that they have options in science and math and art and all of these different areas of their life, and that they shouldn't feel limited based on how they look, whether they're Asian or Latino or black. And I'm at a spot where I want to engage socially, where before it was a very limited, controlled sphere that I wanted to engage in or not engage in. And I realized that, or in my perspective, a lot of the things that are wrong with the world is partially because we just don't talk about it. Like, we don't sit down with people that have a different view and conversate. Because what I found through all these years, I guess one of the things that allows me to tolerate is that I know that everybody has a story, and I'm willing to ask another question, to talk to somebody to figure out why they feel that all black people are running backs, or like whatever it is that they understand or think they understand from their upbringing. And I think this is an opportunity to go further into that with people that we know and don't know. What about, so you Chicago to Cleveland now, you just recently there, but what about your mindset? Like, why do you care about this at this point in time? Why are you here right now?
I think it's a very similar answer in regards to, I don't know what it is about my desire to do this, but I feel a few things have happened to me over the course of this journey that have exposed my perspective to the realities of categorizations of people. And we categorize everything. We simplify as a psychological mechanism, right? And as a result, we categorize people. And I've made judgments over my lifetime, and just talking about this idea that racism, I know it exists, but does it? And how do we know it's really racism? And the reality is I've seen it. And through that journey, I've realized that everybody has a story. Now, does their story bring us, like you said, you know some black people who refuse to talk to white people because we just don't get it. They have a story. People who voted for Trump have a story. People who voted for Hillary have a story. And we may not agree with the actions of today, but understanding the journey to get you to act today, talk today, be who you are today is so important for me to continue to evolve, because I think there is an opportunity for us to be in a common place. And that common place is tolerance, it's understanding, it's patience, it's kindness. And it's just saying, okay, I get it. You did this one thing I don't like. Obviously, there are some limitations to that sentiment, but you did this one thing I don't like. I really want to understand who you are before I pass judgment on you as an individual and all people that I perceive to be like you, and then ultimately create hate. And that's what creates hate, or that contributes to hate creation. And I don't know, call me an idealist, call me an optimist. I just think there's opportunity, like you said, through exposed conversation, understanding people and where they come from, to come to a common point where we can move forward together, even if we don't always agree on the exact pieces within it.
Which is amazing. And that's what excites me about bringing some guests on, because through our 15 years, we've disagreed, like on religion, on politics, finances, how to manage money, how the country should manage money, social policy. We've disagreed on a lot of things, but we could always talk about it. Like that's been a key piece.
And it's brought us to here, where we're in a common place where we don't always agree.
And I think part of the experiment is trying to figure out how we've been able to do it and get here. Like what are the underlying pieces that allow us to do that? Cause a lot of people just can't. And maybe, hopefully we can help somebody figure out how they could have a conversation that's really uncomfortable. Maybe they too could walk up to somebody one day and say, "What is your race?"
But this has been,
I don't recommend doing that.
This has been an awesome conversation. I will say, after some of these discussions, what we are actually going to do is take a couple of days and record a follow-up. So it gives us some time to process the discussion that we had, for the sake of the fact that we're just sharing our personal stories so we can evolve to the next discussion. We're not going to do that this time. But please tune in next time.
Yeah, we'll go a little deeper into something else that gets under the skin, and we're going to expose, evaluate, and evolve.